My mother-in-law never returned home due to a chronic cardiac illness. At the end of the funeral, my husband, with tears running down his cheeks, said,
"You could have done more as a housewife, couldn't you?"
I couldn't help but retort, "Oh? And where in the world did you get the audacity to say something like that to me when you haven't done anything for your own mother yourself?" At that moment, my father-in-law cut into our argument and said,
Okay. I think we all need to calm down. This is a very delicate moment. He just lost his mother, my dear. Maybe you could focus more on being there for him at this vulnerable hour?
I didn't want to send my mother-in-law away like this, and I decided to tell them all the truth. I revealed the whole truth to my father-in-law, who was perplexed. This is the story of how my mother-in-law, with her last breaths, exposed her own son for my own happiness' sake, and how her funeral was, for a brief moment, transformed into a battlefield, wherein I was able to give my husband the justice he deserved for his heinous actions. My name is Dana, and I'm a 29-year-old housewife. I met my husband Zach at my job, and we got married 4 years ago. Since then, my work and private life have been going pretty well, and we were spending every day pretty happily. But 2 years ago, things changed, and I had to resign from my job. This was because I found out that my mother-in-law, Mrs. Manson, fell ill. Since birth, she'd had a comparatively weakened heart, which restricted her from doing a lot of harsh exercising. And right when our story begins, she was approaching 80 years of age, and her heart needed periodic checkups at the hospital to ensure that there wasn't anything that wasn't normal. That all in all seemed simple enough, but the problem was this. Who was going to take her to the hospital during the day? And who was going to look after her while Mr. Manson went out to help take care of his friend's farm? Apparently, the all-too-obvious answer to that question in Zach's eyes was me. And that was why he suggested that I quit my job. To be honest, though, I loved my job and I wanted to keep working. My job was in designing electronics for the home, and my workplace was very employee-friendly, with armchairs, couches, and gaming chairs surrounded by beautiful wooden tables, vending machines with fresh coffee and other drinks, a cafeteria, and above all else, absolutely amazing people. But with the circumstances regarding Mrs. Manson being as they were, I made the mature decision to quit and become a housewife. After that, I began accompanying Mrs. Manson to the hospital. She, who has been told by her doctor to do some light exercise on a regular basis to keep her heart pumping well, took 2 walks every day, both of which were about half an hour long. I sometimes accompanied her on these walks, and as a result of all the time we spent together, we got along very well. My relationship with my husband, however, was a stark contrast. Zach left the care of his mother all to me and didn't even bother to ask me if there was anything in the house that needed to be done. Especially after I became a housewife, he began to condescend to me quite a bit. I somehow managed to relieve my stress regarding this by having Mrs. Manson listen to what I had to say about my husband. One day, after about 2 years of living like this, as usual, Zach was acting like an overbearing douchebag.
"Hey, is dinner ready yet?"
"I'm sorry, I had to go to the hospital with your mother in the evening, so I didn't have much time."
Using excuses now, are we? You're a damn housewife. I'm gonna let you be one. But you can't even do the housework properly?
You don't have to say it in that way.
Look, I'm the one who's taking care of you, financially. If I don't bring in the money for the family, you can't freaking survive. Don't ever forget that.
I was so annoyed with this tone of voice that something inside of me just told me to fight back. You say you're taking care of me financially, saying that I couldn't possibly survive without your support, but you made me quit my job to support your mother, did you not? Until then, I was working my job to pay my share of the bills. Zach stared at me, seemingly offended by something I said.
So let me get this straight. Are you trying to say it's my mother's fault?
I hurriedly corrected myself. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that it's not right for you to look down on me like this and that you need to show more interest in the care of your mother and of the house.
Are you trying to say I don't care about my mom?
That's not what I meant. We argued, and after a very silent dinner, Zach eventually retreated into his bedroom. I didn't know how to get through to him. I just wanted to have an equal, loving relationship like before and support each other as a couple. I thought about the situation and I came to the conclusion that Zach was right. Perhaps I hadn't been showing my appreciation for his toil. I should have appreciated and respected him more because of the role he played in making my life at home all the better. I came to this conclusion, and from then on, I tried to show my appreciation for all his efforts through my actions. I remembered he really liked my homemade strawberry jam to spread on his toast at breakfast. So I went on to make a huge batch of that. I took care of his briefcase when we went to and came home from work. I washed and ironed his business clothes. I made him his favorite dinners every evening. Then one day, Zach came home and presented me with a small package.
Here, I'll give you this. Figured you deserved it.
I knew what was inside just by looking at the box. Whoa! That's the checker-style cake that's all the rage right now, isn't it? What's the occasion? Indeed, the box belonged to a recently opened cake shop in the next town over, and it was selling out so fast every day. Among the most popular of all the desserts they have, there was this interesting set of duo round cakes, one that was coated in dark bitter chocolate, the other coated in white chocolate.
They were featured on TV and looked delicious, so I bought them.
So glad you did, thank you! When I opened the box, one of the cakes was already gone. Did you eat the white one already?
It looked too good, Dana, and I ate my share on the way home.
He laughed as he disappeared into the bathroom to have his bath. I was filled with joy that he had gone all the way to the next town over to buy me the cake that I had been excited about. I felt so glad that my recent actions had not been a mistake. But I wondered about its taste. Was it really so delicious that Zach, who never had a sweet tooth like most people, would eat it? Perhaps he was so stressed out at work that he couldn't prevent himself from eating something sweet to calm the jitters a little. I took a bite of the cake with these new thoughts in mind, and my God, did I insultingly underestimate how sweet and tasty it was. I relished the cake's deliciousness. In that moment, how could I have known that the true meaning of this cake was unlike anything I'd ever expected? The next evening, I received a call from Mrs. Manson, asking me to come over right away. I wondered why she did, given that that particular day was one to go visit the hospital. But I could sense the urgency in her voice, so I immediately headed for her house. Good thing it was only a 15-minute drive from my house, too. When I arrived, Mrs. Manson opened the door to greet me, and after she led me to the living room, where a pot of the usual tea we had together during the day was sat waiting to be poured, she sat down with a mysterious look on her face. She opened her mouth slowly and said, "I was taking a walk and just happened to see Zach." "Oh, really? He should still be working overtime at this hour. Though, maybe he was going around town visiting factories and stuff. He does that occasionally." When I replied in that manner, she quietly shook her head from side to side. "He wasn't at work, because I saw him with..." "With what, Linda?" I could feel the tension flaring between the two of us. The next moment... "Ow! Dana, the pain..." "Linda, are you all right?" Suddenly, Mrs. Manson started clutching her chest and told me she was feeling terrible pain. I rushed to call an ambulance. I was so anxious while the doctors took care of her. As I waited in solitude, Mr. Manson arrived at the scene in a rush, along with Zach. The latter in particular must have been in a huge hurry to get to the hospital. Zach's clothes looked more like wrinkly rags than anything else, and he was not wearing his tie. A few minutes after they arrived, a doctor appeared before us. He told us that Mrs. Manson had managed to survive. Thank goodness. We were all so relieved that we all simultaneously collapsed onto some chairs, devoid of any energy to remain standing. But the doctor continued.
It is possible that the heart attack was caused by induced extreme stress. It's not life-threatening at this point, but we cannot predict when she will regain consciousness. And, furthermore, there is a possibility that she may have another attack in the near future, and when that happens, the probability of surviving that will inevitably be lower than this time, given her vulnerable state.
I couldn't stop shaking when I heard the details. All I could do was hope that she would wake up soon and show her beautiful smile again. That night, Mr. Manson and Zach had to leave for home to rest to get to work early the next day, but I was too concerned about Mrs. Manson to leave her all alone in her hospital. So with the doctor's permission, I had a chair arranged in her room and watched over her that night, hoping with all my heart that everything would be okay. But in the end, my mother-in-law never regained consciousness that day. For the next few days, I went to visit her every day, and I talked to her a lot while she was still asleep, passing on messages from her husband and son, who both couldn't come very easily because of work. After 3 days, however, Mrs. Manson finally woke up from her coma. "Linda! Oh, thank goodness!" I was so happy that I couldn't stop crying. "Hi there, Dana, my dear. I must have fallen ill. I'm sorry for all the trouble I caused you." "Oh, no, please. I would never think of you as any kind of trouble at all. I'm really, really glad that you woke up safely." Mrs. Manson gently held my hand until I stopped crying. When I eventually regained my composure, I noticed that the expression on her face as she held my hand was somewhat gloomy. "Is something the matter?" I asked her, and she opened her mouth rather painfully. Not physically painfully, but rather psychologically, it seemed. "I called you that day because I had something important to tell you." I gulped. "My phone. Do you have my phone?" "Your phone? Oh, yes, I have it right here." I did as I was told and took her phone out of her purse, which I had brought along with me that day. She took the phone from me, spent a few seconds scrolling left and right to find the Photos app, and displayed a particular photograph. What is this? I was shocked to see the face of my husband, Zach, and a woman I also knew, Elsa, who used to be a junior of mine at my old job, going into a hotel, arm in arm. The day Mrs. Manson had her first attack sprang back into my mind very vividly. I was now convinced Zach had rushed from his business with Elsa in a hotel room to the hospital that evening, which explained all too well why his clothes were so disheveled. As I was shaking with anger thinking about this, Mrs. Manson opened her mouth again. "I'm sorry about Zach, my dear. It's all my fault," she said with a downcast look on her face. "I don't mind if you use this photograph as evidence for an affair and ask for a divorce. He needs to be taught a lesson, that bastard." She was staring at me, awaiting a response. I had never seen such an expression on her face before, and I immediately said to her, "It's not your fault in any way, Linda." And I proceeded to politely reject her proposal to teach Zach a lesson. "I'm not going to divorce your son, Linda. I'm going to pretend you never said anything about seeing him with another woman." "Why? Because if you don't tell him now, he might go on betraying you as much as he'd like, and with how disrespectfully he's been acting lately, it's only a matter of time before he brings her home, claiming her as his new bride-to-be, and kicking you out of the family. Is that what you really want your marriage to become, dear? I don't want you to go through that." "Thank you, but I paused before finishing my sentence with a semi-squeak, semi-croak, and a shaky voice. "It's more difficult for me to know that by divorcing him, I'll become a complete stranger to you, Linda. I want to be a part of your family forever. I love you and John so much. And even if it means that Zach will continue to betray me, I'd much rather remain related to you than not." "Oh, my dear Dana, thank you for saying that much. It means so much to me. Then I suppose you're right. I won't tell anyone about this, but I will send you this photograph so you can use it whenever you change your mind." She said this, sent me the photograph, and took my hand tightly in hers. You see, the reason why I'd rather have my own heart ripped out of my chest because of Zach's infidelity than go through with the divorce and become an official stranger by the viewpoint of Mrs. Manson is that I lost my own mother when I was 9 years old, and to this day I still cannot believe she is gone forever. I loved my mother so much, and to have her taken away from me like that left me with the most passionate longing to find someone who could be just like her. Mrs. Manson had so much that my own mother had. such as a very musical laugh, a very interesting view on the world, and a borderline psychotic passion for books. Talking to Mrs. Manson, it sometimes felt like I was talking to Mom again. And I loved Linda for how sweet, warm, and utterly mother-like she was to me. I admit, it sounds weird that I'm still clinging on to the memories of Mom and how I project her image in Mrs. Manson's. But when you love your mother as much as I did, you want to do what you can to try and convince yourself she isn't gone. She still is with you. Always. Mrs. Manson gave me a feeling of security in the reality that my own mother had left decades ago. And I knew I was very lucky to have her as a mother-in-law. The next day, her condition suddenly worsened. Upon the hospital's contacting us, Zach, Mr. Manson, and I rushed to her, but she never woke up again. Unable to accept the reality of our grief, we rushed through the funeral procedures as if time had become our arch-nemesis. During the funeral, I couldn't stop crying as I remembered every single day I spent with Mrs. Manson. At the same time, the thought of living still married to Zach without his mother in the picture anymore seemed frankly ridiculous. But I didn't want to change my mind about my decision to leave Mrs. Manson's family. There was Mr. Manson to think about, for instance, who was also very sweet and kind to me. Always. I didn't want to leave Zach just because of some photos that his mother had taken. I thought I might as well be the bad guy and intentionally make our relationship worse and eventually ask for a divorce. It was the end of the funeral, after the farewell ceremony, and just before the casket was about to be unveiled. All the attendees had left, and the three of us were the only ones left. As if the tension that had been building up so much had broken, Zach broke down in tears.
Mom, why?
He was so distraught, but then he looked up as if he had just remembered something important.
The doctor said her first attack could have been caused by stress, didn't he?
Then he said, as if he was trying to get through to me,
Dana, what happened that day? I hope you didn't do or say anything that put stress on Mom.
I was filled with the feeling that I was the one who wanted to know what had happened that day with him and that woman. But I suppressed that feeling and bit my lip. Blood was oozing around my mouth, but it didn't matter. I was so frustrated and disappointed in Zach, the rightful person who had caused Mrs. Manson so much stress, was behaving like this that I couldn't say anything. He didn't care about how my silence meant I was trying really hard not to expose him during this vulnerable time, and continued.
In any case, you could have done more as a housewife, couldn't you? Why didn't you look after Mom properly when I freaking let you be a housewife?
I couldn't help but retort. Oh? And where in the world did you get the audacity to say something like that to me when you haven't done anything for your own mother yourself? Zach opened his mouth to say something more, but then Mr. Manson intervened.
Now, we've all just lost somebody we love dearly, and we're all a bit overwhelmed. I think we all just need to calm down. This is a very delicate moment. He's just lost his mother, my dear Dana. Maybe you could focus more on being there for him at this vulnerable hour, and understand our grief at the loss of a relative.
I'd reached the end of my patience with those words from Mr. Manson. Even though we're not related by blood, I still cared so much for Linda Manson, which was precisely why I wanted to keep quiet about her discovery. But then I looked at her coffin. There was no way she would want me to send her off in this state. At that moment, her words replayed in my mind. He needs to be taught a lesson, that bastard. I quietly opened my mouth. I don't want to.
Excuse me?
I don't want to. I don't want to because... I took a deep breath. Your wife died because of your son, John. At that moment, a single tear rolled down my cheek.
What? What do you mean?
I showed the photograph to my bewildered father-in-law.
What the hell is this?
He exclaimed. His hands were cupped over his nose and mouth, and he started to tremble. Of which emotion I knew not for the time being. Zach looked at the photo from the side and accused me in a stronger tone than his father.
What the frick is this?
Your mother took this photograph, Zach Manson. Your mother saw you going into a hotel room with this woman, who I know, by the way, Elsa Adams, that day. You have absolutely no idea how stressful that was for her. And if what the doctor said was true, that her first attack was caused by something stress-related, this was the cause of that stress. Then my husband said the most ridiculous thing.
This is a composite. You're such a jerk for doing this during Mom's funeral. And you can't accuse me of infidelity with just one photograph like this.
At this bitter excuse, Mr. Manson grabbed my husband's collar with both hands.
Hey, you get out of your phone. Right now. What? What the hell, Dad? All of a sudden? It's also ambiguous at the moment now, isn't it? If Linda's stress-related heart attack was not your fault, you should be able to show your message history to us right now. Why the frick would you do that?
Mr. Manson reached into his son's pocket, attempting to take his cell phone, but Zach resisted, clutching the phone. They struggled for a few moments thereafter, until finally Zach's phone slipped out of his pocket. I quickly picked it up.
Stop this!
I checked inside and found a very rich history of messages with Elsa Adams. I went back through the messages and found out what they'd been doing on the day Mrs. Manson collapsed. And the day before that, which was apparently Elsa's birthday. This cake. It was the cake I got that day. The white chocolate cake and the smiling woman in a particular photograph made me think. I see now. You never bought the cake for me, but rather, it was the remainder of what you freaking got her. I was at the peak of my fury. We're getting a divorce.
What? Why?
The frick you mean, why? It's all too obvious at this point, bucko.
Can't you at least forgive me for one little tiny harmless affair? Mom's crying up in heaven right now. You really want to give her more pain by divorcing her son?
What in the name of Linda Manson is wrong with you? You don't talk about her as some kind of tool in your barrage of stupid frickin' excuses. I screamed, and my father-in-law followed suit.
You're right, Zach. She's crying in heaven, but because of you. Even you're taking Dana's side, Dad? You were on my side a minute ago.
Zach was screaming at us, but Mr. Manson didn't care. He just told me,
I'm sorry, I didn't know what was going on, my dear.
No, John, it's all right. You did nothing wrong.
Let's just leave this bastard alone in his misery and send Linda home.
Yes, sir. And so Mr. Manson opened the door to let me inside the vehicle that was to take Linda Manson to the crematorium. Zach tried to get in the car, sobbing.
You don't have to come, boy. You're no son of Linda's, nor are you mine.
He kicked him out of the car, leaving him slumped and sobbing down on the pavement. Later, with Mr. Manson's help, I officially divorced Zach. He paid me $30,000 as alimony in one lump sum. And Elsa, the woman whom he was having an affair with, also paid me the same amount of alimony thanks to my lawyer. Mr. Manson told me later that information about the affair had been leaked into their workplace. The two of them became the talk of the town, essentially. After a few weeks, they couldn't take the pressure anymore and resigned. After paying the alimony, my ex-husband became almost penniless. And now he's going to the Public Employment Security Office every day, desperately looking for a new job. And he came crawling to his father to ask to live with him while he was unemployed. But Mr. Manson would have none of that bullshit, of course, and kicked him out with nothing but a Dear John letter. I, on the other hand, made a fresh start and went back to work at my old job thanks to my old boss being concerned about my situation after my divorce. Mr. Manson and I are still good friends, and I occasionally go to his house to offer incense to Linda Manson and talk about her and memories about her. Today, as we sat talking on the porch as usual, talking about her, a soft spring breeze blew through the air. It sounded like her laughter, gently enveloping us in its warmth.